More moves are coming for the Milwaukee Bucks as they have made a sneaky good trade, trading Patrick Baldwin. And this has some pretty big implications going forward. We're going to break down this trade and discuss what this means as we are just hours away from the deadline, as well as discuss some new reports surrounding the Bucks' pursuit of Cam Johnson, as well as a couple of other elite players. So stay tuned for all that in this episode. But before we get into it, if you're part of the 83% who aren't subscribed to the channel, this is the place to be for daily Bucks content. Thank you guys for your continued support over here. If you're part of that 83%, make sure that subscribe button. Ladies and gentlemen, we are hours away from the trade deadline, and the Bucks continue to make moves. They've sent out Patrick Baldwin Jr. and cash to San Antonio, and the exact return at this point is unknown. But basically, this is just a trade to open up a roster spot. Now, there's a ton of reports to go over because a lot of things are dropping, and as things continue to drop, we're going to continue to make videos for you all. But it starts to get very interesting now because this trade, I think, is a precursor for other moves to come. Now, whether that be in the form of a big splash like Cam Johnson is still up in the air. However, at the very least, they have now opened up a roster spot. Now, a few different things to go over here. We're going to dive into some reports surrounding Cam Johnson and things like that in the moment. However, at the very least, if they don't go ahead and get a new player with this trade and the roster spot they opened, this opens up a spot for them to convert Ryan Rollins to an NBA contract. And that seems like the most likely outcome here is that Ryan Rollins will be signed to an NBA contract. It opens up a roster spot so they get rid of Patrick Baldwin Jr. So that is a good sign. Is the fact that they got Ryan Rollins, on the assuming they're going to sign Ryan Rollins to an NBA contract. That being said, there is some new reports going. However, you can see this here. Bucks open up a roster spot for a trade. Now, with what this deal also does is open up a roster spot, like I mentioned, in case they want to make a big move. Now, we know the Bucks obviously made the big trade for Kyle Kuzma. They got their backup big in Jericho Sims, so they're pretty set on that front. But if they want to get the final piece that's missing to this team, which is basically a 3-and-D wing at this point, you could get a guy like Cam Johnson, who is seemingly available, although will have an extremely high price. And the Bucks, in all likelihood, would have to give up their 2031. They'd have to give up a lot of their assets in order to grab a player of this caliber. And again, getting Cam Johnson would be very, very difficult at this point for the Milwaukee Bucks, given what assets they have left following the Kyle Kuzma trade. However, there's been some reports surrounding both Cam Johnson and, of course, Marcus Smart. So you can see this here. The Bucks remain extremely active in trade talks. Two names they've inquired on today is Marcus Smart and Cam Johnson. They're now under the second apron. They have added flexibility to get a deal done. And we know that the Bucks didn't give up their 2031 first-round pick in the trade for Kyle Kuzma, but they did, of course, give up AJ Johnson, which was a pretty big deal because AJ Johnson was a very good player. However, you can see the report here. The Bucks remain extremely active in trade talks. Now, as you start to think about what that can mean, and keep this report with a grain of salt, because we obviously know that this isn't necessarily the Wojs or the former Wojs, the Shams of the world. However, when you start to look at what this could mean for the future of this team, this is very interesting now because Marcus Smart is a very intriguing player, and so is Cam Johnson. You look at some of their stats here. You can look, of course, there's a bunch of different, obviously, players to go over. But when you're talking specifically about Cam Johnson, he's obviously a 3-and-D wing, which would be a perfect fit for this team. Now, Cam Johnson is going to require a lot. And the big question is, will the Brooklyn Nets be willing to give up a guy like Cam Johnson in order to get the Bucks 2031 first-round pick? Now, the big sticking point with this 2031 first-round pick is that the Bucks don't know if Giannis is going to stay. They don't know necessarily if a lot of their players are going to, like, Giannis should stay, but we don't really know the situation of the Bucks in 2031 and beyond. So when you look at Cam Johnson, I mean, he's an extremely good player. Like, he's one of the best 3-and-D wings in the league. He's averaging 19 points a game. He's putting up 4 rebounds, all these different things. However, will the 2031 first-round pick, unprotected, for example, be enough to land Cam Johnson? And that's the big question mark. Now, as we're going to talk about Marcus Smart, that would be also a very interesting conversation. He's obviously primarily a point guard, can play the shooting guard position, is a fantastic defender. And when you're looking at both Marcus Smart and Cam Johnson, how they fit onto this Bucks team, presumably their starting lineup now includes, Kyle Kuzma in it, and Damian Lillard, all these different guys. But when you're talking specifically about adding a wing, because they got their backup big man, you still have Bobby Portis in theory. And one of the worries about this trade that they just made was that maybe they couldn't find any suitors for, guys like Pat Connaughton, guys like Marjon Beauchamp. And because you couldn't find any suitors for them, they had to resort to just trading that away in cash to open up a roster spot. Because if you could get a second-round pick for either of Pat Connaughton or Marjon Beauchamp, you would, of course, you would have made that deal instead of going out and having to, trade Patrick Baldwin and cash to open up that roster spot to either trade for another player or most likely get a guy like Ryan Rollins. And again, I do think that the Bucks are preparing for something, and we're just hours away from the deadline now, about 2 hours as of the time of recording. So I do think they are preparing something bigger here. And the trades surrounding Marcus Smart would be in exchange for Bobby Portis, Pat Connaughton, Marjon Beauchamp, and draft compensation. And this is where things start to get intriguing because the compensation they have, all they have is, they have their 2031 first round pick. Would they be willing to give up a first round pick for Marcus Smart? Probably. And then you get off of Bobby Portis, Pat Connaughton, and Marjon Beauchamp. But now you have to start to think about, like, Bobby Portis is your backup 4/5. Now, obviously, they have Jericho Sims, who can, in theory, play the backup 5 for them. But, I mean, he probably will play the backup 5. But you're missing out on a lot of scoring now if Bobby Portis goes. Now, that can be made up, significantly by Marcus Smart, of course, being able to, slide in there. And this season, Marcus Smart's averaging 8 points a game. He's averaging, 1.2 steals. He's a very solid player. He's a decent facilitator. He's averaging a career low in assists, but he could be a guy that he's very injury prone this season. I don't know if the Bucks would want to give up their 2031 first in exchange for Marcus Smart. Now, yes, you would give your first round pick up for Cam Johnson. Cam Johnson is a perfect fit for this team. It makes a ton of sense. He would slide into your starting lineup as well. And your starting lineup then is starting to get a little bit interesting. I mean, Dame, Cam Johnson, Kyle Kuzma, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Brook Lopez, like a starting lineup like that would be very good. But the question is, where would Marcus Smart and Cam Johnson fit when compared to other teams' packages? Because again, they gave up a pick swap in the deal for Kuzma. They gave up AJ Johnson in the trade for Kuzma. So now, as you're starting to think about what you'd have to give up for Cam Johnson, no new reports have really dropped revealing the price of Cam Johnson. There's been talks of multiple first-round picks, all these different things, and now the big question mark is what it would take. And we're seeing reports about draft compensation. I do think Marcus Smart is probably more likely simply because the Bucks have limited capital, but the picks that they have would open up a spot for Marcus Smart. So let me know down below, would you want to see Marcus Smart on the trade market for the Milwaukee Bucks? And would you like to see the Bucks actually make a move for him? Because I think at this point, things are starting to get very interesting. Their bench is looking a little bit bare. They do have now, Taurean Prince off the bench, AJ Green, Harrison Jr., all these different guys. But as the trade deadline approaches, more moves are certainly on the horizon for the Milwaukee Bucks. And again, this trade opens up a spot to either make subsequent moves or more likely now, and most likely, be able to sign Ryan Rollins. But this is also not a great sign because clearly they haven't been able to move off of Pat Connaughton or Marjon Beauchamp, because if they could, they would have got some assets for them to clear a roster spot instead of having to give up cash in order to clear the roster spot. But let me know down below what your thoughts are. A ton of new reports are dropping. We're now just 2 hours away from the trade deadline. This is the place to be for daily Bucks content. We're going to keep you up to date with all the latest news, so make sure to hit that subscribe button. Thank you guys for watching. Cheers.